Welcome to the ReRooted podcast with Francesca Maximé, trauma-sensitive mindfulness meditation teacher and poet. Together, we'll take a closer look at approaches to transforming trauma with insights from psychology, neuroscience, spirituality, social justice, and the creative arts. Join Francesca and her guests for an exploration of our shared connection and how we can cultivate greater compassion for ourselves and for others. If you'd like to support Francesca and the ReRooted podcast, please visit BeHereNowNetwork.com/Francesca.
Hey everybody, I'm Francesca Maximé, and thank you so much for joining us again for this edition of ReRooted here on the Be Here Now Network. Really honored to have a special creative arts guest, for lack of a better word, a professional musician, Christian McBride, an American jazz bassist, composer, and arranger. He has appeared on more than 300 recordings as a sideman, is a 6-time Grammy Award winner. No joke. You were just listening to a song called Gang Gang, written by Warren Wolf on his People Music album, I believe. And Christian's involved in so many things, and I just want to welcome him to ReRooted. Thank you for joining us, Christian.
Francesca, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, my friend.
Christian McBride. So, first of all, we talked about a year ago on my Wise Girl podcast before it became the ReRooted podcast here on the Be Here Now Network. And I am, just so happy that we're talking more now also about these creative arts and how they can help inspire us and cultivate joy, because a lot of the other parts of the podcast, a lot of the other episodes around like unpacking trauma and things like that. So in any case, that's why I'm really happy that you're here. And I want to start with what you were doing last night. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that kind of bridges the social justice piece and the racial awareness piece and the, all of that with the creative piece.
Well, as you know, my wife, Melissa Walker, and I run a nonprofit called Jazz House Kids. And it teaches kids through the medium of jazz, the democracy of jazz, the creativeness of jazz, the high level of expression through jazz. And so we see over a total of 1,000 kids throughout the school year. We're in schools around the state of New Jersey. We're about to start branching out into New York very soon. We have a summer camp that happens in August, which culminates in our Montclair Jazz Festival. But last night was our annual gala event, and we had it at City Winery in New York. And the theme of the gala was celebrating 1959. And a lot of jazz critics and musicians as well have regarded 1959 as this sort of watershed year, because if you ask most musicians and most critics to name the 10 most important jazz albums of all time, probably half of that list would come from albums that were recorded in 1959. So there was just some magic spark that happened in that year. Miles Davis released Kind of Blue. John Coltrane released Giant Steps. Charles Mingus released Mingus Ornette Coleman released The Shape of Jazz to Come, and Dave Brubeck released Time Out. And so we invited a bunch of musicians to play selections from those albums last night. And our concept is to always mix a handful of our students to be able to play with the established professionals. So it was a very, very wonderful night. A lot of people came out. I think we made a lot of money. I have to check with the missus later. But it seemed to be a really good night all around.
It's beautiful. And you had NBC News anchor Lester Holt as the MC, is that right?
That's right. And we played a quick little bass duet because, he's a bass player.
No, I love it. And it's... I just love how music finds its way into so many people's lives. It's so much a part of, even when people who are like, Lester, as a fellow journalist and Mr. Holt, perhaps I should say, that it balances out the intensity sometimes of the work that one does when one has to be so attentive to.
Well, that's exactly what he said when we were off stage last night. I can't imagine what kind of stress and like being, I mean, well, you know about that, being on live news, the sort of daily angst that you must get, reading his teleprompters, and you get like some sort of traumatic breaking news story happens. And he said, sometimes when I go home, I just got to pick up my bass and transfer to the other place.
Yes, and I love that. Transfer to the other place. I'm going to hold that as a placeholder, and then we're going to come right back to that, because I think that's really critical. The part about Jazz House Kids, I mean, you're talking about kids in New Jersey who are of what age? What is their sort of background, their circumstance? What kind of kids are you, is Jazz House Kids helping out with this kind of a gala?
Well, here's the thing. Like, when you talk about jazz and what that means, I think our overall goal, every jazz artist's goal, is to somehow give the music more exposure, to expose particularly younger people who are sort of besieged with pop culture and pop images all the time. Even if they don't really follow it, you don't really have much of a choice, because it's just in your face all the time. So our job is to boost the music. So with that being said, we have kids from all means, all races. What I'm most proud of with Jazz House Kids, what has turned out to be our flagship program, is a program called Chica Power. And it is strictly for young girls to come and learn the art of jazz, the art of listening to jazz, but particularly to play jazz, because at some point we realized that there was just so many boys in our program. And we all sort of collectively looked and said, where are the young ladies? And so my wife went out and actually she basically did like her own poll. She kind of did like her own research, and she went to these high schools and talked to these young ladies and said, do you like jazz? Don't you like jazz? If so, why? If not, why not? And some of the answers that she got were quite interesting, things that we weren't prepared for. I think the one that moved Melissa the most is when this young lady says, well, and she said this was not good or bad. It was just an observation. She says, in general, boys seem to have more confidence. They don't mind failing in front of other boys. Boys get embarrassed just like anybody else, but they recover much quicker. Whereas I feel like if I go into this jazz group and I'm not sounding good, not only am I too embarrassed to fail in front of the boys, but I feel like my fellow girls are going to look at me like, you failed all of us.
Right.
And that was really deep to
and
hear
how
that.
old, roughly?
This girl was maybe 12 or 13.
Exactly.
And so Melissa said, well, let's create a program where all you young ladies can just be among yourselves, and you do what you need to do in front of each other. You will support each other. And the best part of it all is almost all of our boys have said, ladies, where you been? We need you here. So it's really great to see how these young ladies have come into the program and really have embraced it, and they're building their confidence through this music.
Yes, I love that. And, one of the themes of the ReRooted podcast, where we really invite you to kind of, get back and get reconnected to your own roots, your own tethering in the earth, of the earth, that you're from that, but also to yourself, right?
Yes.
That you can grow strong, have that nice strong trunk, and then you grow out with the branches and the leaves, and then there's the fruit, and that nourishes other things.
There you go. That's right.
And all those little roots are talking to each other underground and all that kind of stuff, and how all that's sort of working, not obviously necessarily, but that it's
exactly
happening, right?
That's right.
And to that point, Carol Gilligan, I interviewed recently, and I'm not sure what order these are going to air in, these shows, but she just wrote a book about patriarchy. And she, is a professor at NYU and talks a lot about, just at that age you're talking about, how girls lose their voice
Right.
because of the socialization, and that it's a consequence of patriarchy overall, and that boys tend to lose their sort of heart connection, and that it's maybe a little bit younger with what that happens in boys, but that really you are just doing exactly what is needed in order to kind of allow young women to come into their own power, and not in an aggressive way,
Exactly.
but
Right.
in creative and collaborative way, and
That's right.
lift
That's
each
right.
other's boats.
There you go. Because we thought that, when we came up with this idea of Chica Power, the idea was not to sort of have like, a separatist movement, so to speak. We're going to have like an all-female band, only jazz history for girls. The overall goal was to somehow bring everybody together. And I mean, the boys in our program, we're talking between ages 8 and 18. And there's just some things that boys just don't think about, And I think that when they saw, I think a lot of the girls thought that the boys wouldn't be welcoming, kind of like, oh man, what's this going to be? Now we're going to have to, change the music. And none of that ever happened. The boys were so excited to see young girls playing the bass, young girls playing the trumpet, young girls playing the trombone. These instruments that are not traditionally associated with young women. And the boys are really, really excited. And so that's really raised all ships.
I love that, because it invites collaboration as opposed to competition.
Right.
And
There
that,
you go. Right.
and that's a consequence of the competition piece of patriarchy, more so than it is of how we sort of naturally unfold to be, as you said, when we are transferring into this other place being kind of more the natural state of how we are when we don't have this hierarchical thing that's kind of put upon us structurally.
Right. Right.
Where we have identities, roles to fill. This is what it means to be a boy. This is what it means to be a girl.
Right. I'm very proud of my wife and just the program in general. And I think obviously we're going through a very transformational period in American culture right now that has been needed. It's been bubbling and boiling under the surface for quite some time. I don't think it has resolved itself yet. I think it will probably be a long time before it does. I think there's still like some, I think there is sort of some natural human qualities that will always just sort of take over first, whatever that is, So we're in the landscape seems to be changing, and more people are thinking about things that they've never thought of before. And it's really healthy. It's really important. But we're still in the middle of it. It's going to be interesting to see how it kind of balances out or resolves itself, if it does.
Right. Well, again, a lot of times people say we're on a spiral. So it spirals towards and out, right? So it's forever. We're not just necessarily stuck in this one place, but it's kind of a slow groove out, but like a sound wave, right? It's kind of expanding. I mean, we just saw those beautiful pictures of the black hole that a young woman was essentially responsible for capturing. So let's go back to this piece about 1959 and kind of what you just said about, sort of not said about the political climate that we're in right now. What was happening in 1959 that created such amazing jazz? Why was that so important for the culture, the people? What did it mean to certain communities? And what can we learn from that and apply to where we are now beyond things like Jazz House Kids that you're doing?
It's very interesting. I think a lot of people have written, discussed, there's been books about it. And there's been a lot of different theories and ideas as to why lightning struck like that in 1959. I really do think it was sort of just this cosmic thing that happened. I mean, if you want to whittle it down to real specifics, kind of like what was going on socially and politically and and frankly, just musically. 1959 saw, if you look at rock and roll, rhythm and blues, which had not yet become soul music. You think of where jazz was at that time. You think of where the civil rights movement was at that time, which actually was really in its very early stages. There was sort of this crossroads between the church, the secular world, jazz musicians, blues musicians. They all were in the same place at the same time. So it wasn't a far stretch to, like the stretch between Ray Charles and somebody like Miles Davis was very, very small, particularly in the community, in the Black communities and in the whole music community. I would say by like 1965, 1966, they started to separate because soul music became its own thing, its own genre, had its own fans, and jazz started to kind of go this way, became a little more esoteric, a little more artist driven because, we never sold any records, right? But I think in 1959, everything was all there at the same time, trying to figure it out together. The civil rights era was just beginning. The bus boycott had happened 4 years before. Martin Luther King was really starting to get some head of steam going. The Nation of Islam was starting to get a head of steam going in New York. Elvis Presley was in the Army. I think Buddy Holly had died already. So like rock and roll was sort of in the Rolling Stones had not yet come to America. So rock and roll was sort of in this traumatic limbo because like its biggest star was in the Army and many of his other biggest stars they had passed away. Little Richard had decided to become a preacher, so he was off the scene. So rock and roll was in this limbo, and sort of the more sophisticated, elegant people who were appreciating the arts tended to turn to jazz, because it was still very much a people music, if you will. It hadn't yet gotten too esoteric, because when you talk to people about why did jazz sort of lose its, why did jazz fall out of favor with popular culture? Most people will say, well, it got too esoteric, it got too weird, it got too heady, Whereas I think in 1959, all of these things were still kind of close together, and these social movements that really started to ramp up in the 60s, the music changed with it. Like I said, soul music became its own thing. The British invasion came in 1964. Malcolm X, of course, was murdered in 1965. King was murdered in 1968. So in 1959, you have like the roots of this movement that's about to come. Mm. And I think it's just a very exciting time. And just all of these things just kind of hit right at the same time. These roots, you said, like you were talking about the roots talking to each other.
Right.
That's what was happening in 1959.
Right. I love that. And I love the alchemy of that. And to be honest, I don't know, about 20 years ago, I remember going to see Wayne Shorter and Herbie Hancock with my mom and a girlfriend from college, and it was some far out fusion stuff. And I know what it was like. They were like, "What is this?" Didn't get it. And I mean, I had studied fake book and stuff and piano when I was younger, and I knew it a little bit, but it was kind of like, yeah, I know. It's so to your point about whether or not jazz got a little trippy, as opposed to this part where the roots were kind of coming together with the social part. I feel you on that.
I saw that same tour. I saw Wayne and Herbie. I can't remember where I saw them. Saw them on the road somewhere. And they really did push the listeners about as far as they could go, right?
Yes,
and so at the end of the concert, we heard Wayne and Herbie talking among themselves. And I couldn't believe it. And this actually was sort of an eye-opener. Wayne looked at Herbie, he says, I don't know, I don't think it was really clicking tonight. and Herbie said, yeah, it probably wasn't the best performance tonight, but we'll get them tomorrow, right? And so I just remember thinking, like, okay, so they actually agreed that tonight might have been a little too trippy. Well, I'm glad to know that, number one, they're aware of it. Number two, they were actually okay with it. Kind of like, well, hey, that's where we were, like, artistically, that's where we were sent at that time. We had to go there to find out that it wouldn't work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they were okay with that. And I love that. Really
I really love that too. And it is deep. And to the point about, spiritual practice, if you will. I mean, I think this is really kind of at that level. Like, how do we know what our growing edges are? We may not all have an audience of hundreds of people to be our guinea pig, so to speak. But,
right.
I mean, the alchemy of what happens in a live auditorium is what you do as a musician.
Right. That's right.
So it's really no different if you're sitting on your cushion, for several hours or something in some state or just doing whatever it is that you do for your practice, whatever that is. But that this was sort of like, well, going to that growing edge, right? Yeah. And that all of their practice, all of their discipline, all of their knowledge of precision and of this is what we could do if we wanted to, quote unquote, make it sound nice or be appealing to the audience, if we were trying to package it in such a fashion, but that performance was not that. It was about exploring and staying curious, which is the foundation of what we're talking about, I think, in spiritual practice, about letting go and being open to see what comes and being in the moment.
Right. That's it. You pretty much nailed what all improvisers strive to do. All jazz improvisers strive to do that.
Tell me more.
I don't know if I could say it any better than you did, but I think that for me, speaking of Wayne Shorter again, Wayne Shorter, actually both Wayne and Herbie, they've been practicing Nichiren Buddhism for probably 45 years now. And as human beings, Wayne and Herbie happen to be probably two of the most inspirational, some of the kindest people you've ever wanted to meet in your whole life. And when I think of their music separately, not as a team, but like the music that Wayne Shorter created with his groups through the years and the music that Herbie Hancock has created with his groups through the years, they're vastly different, whereas Herbie is much more, Herbie's really off the cuff. Herbie will play almost with anyone doing anything. I'm game to try whatever, you know what I mean? Whereas Wayne is the same, but Wayne's compositions are so impeccably thought out and so geniusly crafted, you know what I mean? I really think he's sort of our living Beethoven or Bach, but when you speak with him, he almost never, ever, ever makes any musical references. He always makes spiritual references or cosmic references, or I think his background as a visual artist also kind of helped shape his concept as a musician. So he'll also make visual art references in his music. And sometimes you just need Wayne to tell you what the note is. You know what I mean? Like, dude, is it B flat or is it B natural? Is the chord C9 or C3? Come on, what is it? He's like, yeah, it's more like Jupiter at 5 a.m., And he's like, dude, come on, man, ain't helping me. So, but then at some point you put all of this together And it really makes perfect sense. There's another story about Wayne. Some guy, well, I don't know if this is a true story, but it's I saw this in the book when Weather Report was together. Somebody made the casual, everyday question of, say, Wayne, what time is it? And Wayne replied, well, it's relative.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
And so one of the other band members was like, hey, it's 3:45, bro.
Right. They stepped in. They looked at their watch and they stepped in.
That's right. So Wayne's sense of the big spiritual creative picture when you're improvising as a musician, even though I don't think I, nor anyone I know, could ever be that deep or that spiritually in tune with whatever you may call it, Buddha, God, Jehovah, Allah, whatever you call them, just this energy, the spirit that's much bigger than the human spirit. That's what we need to be trying to get in touch with as musicians, as artists, as everyday people. And I find that to dial it all the way back to what we were talking about, I think somehow confidence is directly tuned in with your faith. You know, I think that I've always, I've never thought of myself as a religious person. My family, we grew up as Christians. You know, we went, my great grandmother was the founder of the church that we grew up in Philadelphia, St. Paul Church. But my mother, you know, very modern day hip new school woman, she says, listen, you carry your spirituality with you, not just on Sunday morning, you know. You don't necessarily have to go to church to be in tune with God, you know. She says so many of them people, and she said, I'm not trying to talk bad about them, but there are a lot of hypocrites in that place, you know. She says, I'm going to, you know, I want you to be in tune with the spirit 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You don't necessarily have to go to church for that, you know.
Beautiful.
And so I somehow, I always tend to relinquish myself to whatever greater power that's why I try not to. I mean, people always say, oh man, you never get nervous. You know, it looks like you never get scared. You never get angry. None of that is true. I'm a human being. We all have emotions, right? But I tend to think that there's a greater force that will always lead you to where you need to get to as long as you let it. And you're a good person and you think positive and you work hard. You still got to put in the work to do what you need to do. But I find that not a lot of people are really sort of, I don't know. I have a feeling that people are confusing spirituality, faith, religion. They kind of all lump it together, and we sort of have like this anti-spiritual community where people believe in, well, I guess it's always been like this. They believe in money. They believe in power. These days, they believe in Instagram followers, you know, but I don't know. I think there's a real joy. There's a real sort of relief to have a strong faith, you know, and to link that with how Wayne Shorter speaks and how he composes. I hope I could get to some version of that.
Well, I think after 6 Grammys, we know you did get to some version of that. We're not, you know, you're not in the replicating petri dish, perhaps, of Wayne as no one should be, right? But, you know, I would just certainly say you have that. And anyone who has had, and, you know, I'm a poet, right? And so anybody who has had this like creative impulse to just...
I got your books. I was going to find them joints so I can embarrass you. I could make you blush on camera, but I did some moving around down here. All my books are all out of whack.
That's okay. You're funny. Thank you. Hopefully I'll have a new publisher someday and I can get another one out there. But I just won a prize, actually, and I'll disclose this in the spirit of being improvisational, right? And sort of whatever it is that wants to come out or come forward being the thing that's kind of the real gold with the, your inner something, right? Whatever it is that's wanting to move forward. I just won a prize for a poem that I wrote when I got back from an encounter with someone that I just kind of wrote it. It wasn't something that I had thought about. I didn't, go to school and, study these different ways of iambic pentameter and lyrical poetry and, all that kind of stuff.
Sorry.
That's okay. It was more a organic process, which is what you're talking about, and allowing that organic process to unfold by picking up a pen, or in my case, putting, sitting down at my computer after I had had this encounter and this experience with someone, and then putting it down on paper. And then, yes, of course, I did the work, quote unquote, of sending it in, but it's not the poems that I fuss over that seem to make any bigger of a difference, it's not, those aren't the ones that really sing to your heart.
Yeah.
They can be okay, but they're not the ones that kind of hit the nerve.
When I recorded my first album called Getting To It, I wrote these 2 songs, and in my brain I'm thinking, okay, these are the songs that the people are going to like. These are going to be like, the hits. I know that doesn't exist in jazz, but the song that everyone seemed to like was the song that I just, like, it was going to be like my, my jazz tune, like the tune that only the musicians would like.
Mm-hmm.
And that song was the song that sort of came the easiest. I remember thinking about only the song. I didn't really think about whether people were going to like it or not, or if it was going to be the hit. And that sort of became the one that everybody liked. So I think when you wrote your poem after that, you said you had an encounter and you just came and wrote it. I mean, I deeply admire yours and every writer or poet, composer, their prolificness, because listen, I got both your books. I remember the night you came down to the Vanguard to hear my band, and we were hanging late after the gig, and all these people were all hanging out at the bar having a good time, and you dropped some poetry right there in the middle of the club. And I was like, man, how does she write this often? That's admirable.
Thank you. You're funny. I don't know. Well, I think that, back to this thing that's emergent, right? Like my mindfulness teacher, Jack Cornfield, who is, sort of my main mentor, he talks about, he tells a story oftentimes at retreats and stuff about how there's a kid that wasn't doing all so well in school. And the teacher had said to him, like, but what is your gift? What are you, and he was like, I don't have a gift. And then he thought about it later when he had bumped into someone, and he came back to the teacher and said that my gift is in catching fish to give to my family, to give to my community. Like that's my gift. He's like, I'm really good at that. And I really, I bring dinner home. And that's,
wow.
A valuable contribution, right?
That's incredibly valuable.
And in this society, we tend to want to have everybody be perhaps sort of cut from the same cloth, in terms of whether it's Wall Street or...
You bring up something that a few of us had a discussion about probably 12 hours ago as we were leaving the gala event. There's this one student who has been with us for quite some time, and they're in college now. And one of their college professors came up to us and said, hey, we'd like to speak with you about student X. And student X is really, the quote was, they are just so painfully shy. Like, they don't talk. They don't try to go after these opportunities that we're giving them. And we just need to see if there's anything wrong, and like kind of what's the deal. And at first there was a little bit of, we kind of all stood and kind of looked at each other and said, yeah, maybe. Oh, but wait a second. We thought, what's wrong with being shy?
Yeah.
If this person doesn't like to speak, if this person isn't sort of, like you said, everybody wants to be cut from the same, everybody has to be a go-getter. Everybody has to be chasing success. Everybody has to be, excuse me, but, everybody has to be badass, right? And like, that's not true. It's okay if you're shy. It's okay if you want to hang back. It's okay if you're not chasing what is perceived as success. Nothing's wrong with that. I was like, hey, are they passing the test? Yeah, they're passing the test. Are they getting good grades? Yeah, they're getting good grades. Do they sound good? Yeah, they sound great. Well, what's the problem?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah,
what's authentic for you? And
that's right.
Each just be our own uniqueness and have that unfold, and then just see how it changes, as all things do also, or as it evolves, I should say, not so much changes per se.
And the other thing was this student's probably 20 years old. It's like, how formed are we as people at age 20?
Right. Well, a lot of the, folks that study these things say is around 25, 27 is when things kind of slow down, with the brain. And that as mammals, we come out of the womb, we only have a small portion of our brain developed. That's
probably earlier with men.
Well, we all have neuroplasticity options, right? So that
I did get really stupid once I got to high school. I used to be so smart.
What happened in high school that changed?
Girls.
Yeah. Well, that's a distraction, right? So
real stupid.
Yeah. Well, but again, then to go back to like the psychological aspect of it, it would be, what need was that serving, right? Like what about that? How was that helpful? Meaning, was it, because it made you feel more important? Is it because you had a desire for connection, as all humans do as mammals? Is it because...
Well, me specifically, I can actually tell you a very concrete reason why. Because growing up as a kid, I would hear most of these boys talk about their conquest at age 11 and 12, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, in retrospect, that's way too early, I believe, for any kid to be thinking in terms of sexual activity, right? It's just too young, But, grew up in a particular neighborhood where I guess people got started earlier, right? And so by the time I got to high school, like, I'm thinking, well, what's wrong with me? Nobody likes me, People, I used to get teased all the time. I'm a big nerd. I'm fat. I'm a dork. I got big teeth. You like jazz? Please. Oh boy, get out of here. And then like overnight, I mean, literally overnight, I went from being this fat, big tooth dork who likes jazz to like, all of a sudden I got skinny. I grew into my face, and literally overnight it went from 0 to 10. Like all these girls started liking me, and I went, wow, I'm cool now, And I just didn't know how to handle that transition, To know that people actually liked me now, that was, I guess, maybe it was a feeling of, let me enjoy all of this before it turns back,
Well, you bring up an interesting point, because that's one of the mindfulness teachings too, right? Is enjoy the goodness that's here when it's here. Enjoy the joy that's here, right? So that there's no real problem with enjoying what's present if people are enjoying your company and wanting to spend time with you. But that it's the craving, it's the sort of greed, the lusting, obsession with only ever sort of focusing on that as the root of dissatisfaction, right?
Yes.
So that if we end up always just having that be their only thing, then our view gets so narrow that we miss the next miracle when the other thing happens down the line.
Yes.
Or we get locked into fearing that we're going to lose it, as you just said, which then puts us into aversion, which I fear the other, right? Which again takes us away from what actually is, which could be a mix of, okay, so I'm more popular now, but some days I'm going to be,
Right.
the girls may still not call me. And that doesn't mean that my own inner dignity and worth is completely out the window because of what your grandmother said. You still have that inborn in you, soul force, whatever it is, that
Yes.
isn't going anywhere or necessarily connected to the external events in the world.
Preach, teach. Oh man, I'm gonna have to come see you once a week.
I do Zoom sessions. I do Skype sessions. Oh,
No, I need to come. I need to come sit on that couch for an hour.
that's okay too. That's okay too.
Oh, no, I won't ask you that on camera. I was going to say, can I bring my flask of vodka?
You're funny. Well, it's funny though, because I haven't drank since the time that I, was in the Village Vanguard. I haven't had any alcohol in the last.
What happened that night?
Well, no, I mean like that period, right? Like so.
Oh, okay.
I was
4 or 5
years ago.
Did something traumatic happen at the Vanguard I didn't know about?
No. I guess all I'm trying to say is I don't know if I would be so able to spit poetry out of anywhere because that 2 a.m. social lubricant has a little bit of
a little influence, right?
Well, I have to say, at a certain point, because why?
It was killing.
Well, thank you. It takes away the inhibitions, right? So that's the whole point, is if you're not inhibited, if you're not fearful, if the anxiety isn't there, then you're just free to flow. I mean, that's what they call it when you're rapping, when you're spitting, when you're when you're improvising.
Yeah.
But I don't need the booze to do it anymore. I'm just saying that I know that sometimes there were times when I was a little more inclined to perhaps to go like that.
I hear you.
Because of that. And now I don't need that anymore.
Well, good for you. Good for you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting, right? But you know why? Is because as I continued to sort of study what they call the precepts, no killing, no harming, right speech, wise, wise sexual relations, excuse me, and those kinds of things, no intoxicants. It just became clear that these were the things that you could do structurally to kind of enhance the framework of your life to not create further issues.
Yeah.
But you could then like sort of start from a cleaner slate for me. Like, it's not one more thing I got to worry about. You know what I mean? So if I'm not telling lies, then I don't have to worry about that. If I don't have, if I'm not killing things, then I don't have to worry about feeling bad about that. If I'm not, engaging in relationships or relations that are potentially problematic, then I don't have to worry about that.
I don't have to worry about that. Right.
So it's been a useful framework. And everybody can do it their own way.
And that's not only very spiritual thinking, that's quite practical thinking as well.
Ain't nobody got time for that. I'm like, this body isn't getting any younger, and you gotta take what's here.
Take care of it. Yeah.
No, I messed around for a long time. So okay, we're having a good time. Let's talk a little bit about what kind of you were saying earlier about kids, Instagram, social stuff. Frankly, a lot of the podcasts that I'll be doing over the next period of time have to do with implicit bias, racism, white supremacy, patriarchy, all these sort of social things. And one of the Dharma teachers, Ruth King, that I interviewed last year, she talks a lot about how the creative arts really can really help, especially communities of color, to just nurture and reclaim uniqueness and resilience and ways in which we can get back in touch with, frankly, I think a lot of the wisdom that is missing in other cultures that could be very beneficial if tapped back into. I'm losing you a little bit on the sound. Okay, better. Go ahead.
Really? Oh, okay. I wonder what happened. anyhow, I was saying that I just got back from Japan.
All right, welcome back. We had a couple technical difficulties. Please continue, Mr. McBride.
We got it all straight. Yeah, I just got back from Japan, and most musicians really like going to Japan, and sometimes for what could be deemed as selfish reasons, because we feel that Japanese culture, which is a very old culture, they really understand the value of creativity and art. So particularly when people who are viewed as geniuses at creative expression, they will treat you like a king or a queen, So you go to Japan, I won't go as far as to say they worship you, but they give you your proper respect. They understand that what you do as an artist is very special,
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you look at the culture around that surrounds that, it's interesting that they don't appreciate you because you have sexy, glossy photos, that you have 100,000 Instagram followers, that you've sold 500,000 records or 1,000,000 records, or that you're dating some celebrity, that you're on the cover of some magazine. They literally don't care about that. What they care about is that the art that you create is on a high level, and I really get that there are many cultures, particularly older cultures, they can sort of get under the fray. I think, or above the fray. I think American culture has been. We care too much about the gift wrap and not what's inside the box.
Mm.
As long as the wrap looks sweet and there's this nice little sexy silk bow, who cares if, there's garbage inside of the box?
Mm-hmm.
And I think social media itself is not the issue. It's how we handle it, and what we have allowed to do that to us. I certainly think social media has done some wonderful things. But I also believe that America, which is already somewhat of a cynical nation, I think it's made it worse. I think there are a lot of people who have. Hello? Are you still there?
Oh, yeah.
What was that?
I can hear you. You're good.
Oh, that was weird. I'm sorry. I done messed up my flow.
That's all right.
I find it interesting that I think there's a lot of people using social media to prey on the fears and the anger of people who follow it. And in order to counter that anger and that fear, we've almost gotten into more of a to kind of shield ourselves from that. We've become even more of a less spiritual community,
Mm-hmm.
a less faith-based or less faith-driven community. And when I say that, I'm not talking about church or God or whatever you call it, but like it's almost like I don't see a lot of uplifting anymore. I see a lot of combat, a lot of verbal combat, a lot of out angering other people, and I'm thinking like, hey, what happened to the love? Nobody's spreading any love anymore,
Mm-hmm.
And I find a lot of these ancient cultures Yeah, they have their issues too. Every culture has some issue that if you go deep down inside, it's troublesome, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think there's no such thing as there's no such thing as utopia. Not in a culture of human beings. It just isn't. You're not going to find that. Now you can have that within yourself on occasion. But what you can't have in yourself, you surely are not going to find in the culture of human beings. It just doesn't exist, So I wish that we could live in a culture that wasn't constantly trying to out anger each other. There's a famous Martin Luther King quote, some hate does not drive out hate. Only love can do that,
Mm-hmm.
and we're not loving anymore. We just, putting out fires with fires.
Right. Well, what's interesting about that is that if we talk about mindfulness and teachings, ancient wisdom teachings, and we talk about how we're connected and how we're interdependent and how, things are really more processed and less fixed, kind of to Wayne Shorter's point about like, well, it kind of B flat, it's kind of like Jupiter at 5 a.m. Like,
right.
So much naming the thing, but we're trying to, what's the gist of it, right?
Yeah.
If you're a psychologist, you follow Eugene Gendlin's focusing. It's like the philosophy of the implicit. They would call it the felt sense. And that's sort of what you're talking about when you're feeling it, when you're feeling the flow, right? When you're doing your flow. And that the culture of patriarchy is one that's founded on separation, separating men's and young boys' hearts from their whole self and girls' voices from their whole self, to your point earlier. And even Charles Blow, who writes for the New York Times, Brent Staples writes for the New York Times, both Black men. Staples got a Pulitzer, and Charles Blow just really did this little video. Did you see it on Twitter?
No, I haven't seen it.
Well, he was just basically saying, like, don't come at me for saying, why am I supposed to be in competition with this man who is brilliant that I go to as my mentor for my, for when I have questions, and let's be happy for Brent for getting a Pulitzer, for doing all this amazing work on journalism about racism in this country and around the world and how it's problematic, and is rewarded for it. Let us clap for him, not clap back at this issue of us fighting against one another. And that philosophy of you or me, as opposed to you and me necessarily, right? That the whole point of the Buddhist teachings is wrong view, which is delusional view, which is me assuming or thinking that I'm separate in the first place, which is the fodder for then me being able to compete against you or see you as different or want to eat you up or crush you down or have power over you. That all of that is just a fabrication. It's not really how things really are. So when we're inviting people to drop back into that place that you say it's within you, and of course, it can be out there. It's because we've forgotten that it's in there, right? Or not cultivated it, which is part of the practice of sati, mindfulness.
Exactly, right.
Which is any kind of practice, including your musical practices, spiritual practice. And that can remind us, it's the remembering, the returning back to what's already there so that we can connect with one another from that place, not from this egocentric Instagram place.
Oh, man. Oh, you're so eloquent.
I can't play the bass.
It's such a beautiful way to put it all in perspective.
Well, I mean, I think that, what you're doing is a different level of practice. Do you know what I mean? Talk about the Newport Jazz Festival, talk about your podcast, talk about all the stuff that you're doing up at Lincoln Center, for those who are in New York or want to come. I mean, we know you travel all around the world, and you just mentioned being in Japan, and how their framework is a different framework.
Much different. Yeah. Much different framework in Asia, much different framework in Europe, much different framework in South America. It's just interesting how artists are treated in other places of the world. But with specific regards to some of the other projects that I'm doing, in 2016, I was named the successor to George Wein as artistic director of the 65-year-old Newport Jazz Festival.
Woo-hoo.
That's been to consciously think of sort of being at the artistic helm of such a legacy is deep to think about it, you know. So this will be my third year as artistic director, and we just made the final announcement of all of the artists just about a week and a half ago, and thinking about what George Wein sort of put into place with the Newport Jazz Festival. Every style of jazz has always been represented at that festival throughout the years, which at first was just a 2-day festival. Just one stage for 2 days, which has now turned into 4 stages over 3 days. So we have 65 artists that we present at the festival every year. And tell you where my faith has really had to kick in is when I was designated as the type, when it was made official that I would be an artistic director, I now got a swarm of CDs and resumes in the mail, like, yo, you gonna hook me up at Newport, right? And I was like, wow, I kind of knew this was coming, but wow.
There's a tidal wave.
This is deep, right? And because I'm a musician, right? I'm a musician. I would say 3/4 of these resumes and CDs I would get would be from people I know already, you know? And so it overnight became like very difficult to now have to say, look, I can't put you on the festival this year, you know? So, but I realized that the festival is, well, the jazz community at large is the bigger picture, you know? Me personally is not significant. What is significant is how the jazz community benefits from the oldest jazz festival in America, you know? So I really try to keep that in mind. That really helps me get through any angst of having to tell a musician, it's like, no, bro, I ain't gonna book you this year.
Well, but you know, you bring up an interesting point, Christian, because again, one of the key teachings is equanimity or balance and discernment. And discernment is boundaries, really, healthy boundaries, you know, in the sense of saying like, hey, I think the terminology in Tibetan Buddhism is sort of idiot compassion. I don't know, the translations are a little wonky.
Idiot compassion?
Idiot compassion as opposed to, like deep, just general, real love compassion, right? And this idea of like, don't try to be nice just to be nice and then end up with more trouble. Like sometimes it's okay to say no, or it's appropriate to say no, or there's a reason to say no, and that's okay, right? Yeah. And no now doesn't mean no never. It just means not now at this time.
Right.
And it's not, Ruth King says nothing's permanent, perfect, or personal. So like, let it go. It's not a big deal.
Give me that one more time. I'm gonna write that down. I need to use that. Nothing's perfect.
This is Ruth King. Again, quoting her, she's a Dharma teacher. Nothing's perfect, permanent, or personal. She's rephrasing the Buddhist teachings to make them current.
Got it. I need to hit you up after we're done here. You need to turn me on to some books.
I will. I will. Well,
dropping all kinds of knowledge on me.
Oh, come on. It's inside though, isn't it? Don't you already know it? Don't you think when you see something or feel something or hear something that feels true, it's already inside you, but it's just kind of like...
Absolutely. Very much so. I feel very, very lucky that I think most musicians feel like this. The happiest and probably the most at peace I ever feel is when I'm holding my bass, is when I'm playing my bass. I really feel like some sort of a visceral connection to that, you know. It's like the like I'm holding my bass, I'm playing the bass. The universe is like, okay, you cool now. I got you. Don't worry, you just play, you know.
Beautiful. You're cool now. I got you. You
Yeah,
just play.
yeah,
Now, wouldn't that be nice if we could just live our lives that way, even if we're not
hello.
as a basis? You're
Right.
cool. I got you.
Yeah,
Just play.
yeah.
Yeah. Just be.
And because of that, you know, people always, I found it strange that people would often say, Christian, you look so happy when you play. You know, you always smile when you play. My thought is, well, doesn't everybody? I never understood why that was like, why that always got special mention, because I thought that as a musician, where would you be more happy than at your instrument? You
Mm.
know? But yeah, I just feel some real joy when I have my instrument in my hand and when I'm creating. I mean, I feel like it's the same way with you when you write your poetry. I feel like when you do your, I started practicing Buddhism officially. I don't know if I told you that about a year ago, or maybe just over a year ago now.
Yeah, we had just talked the first time.
Yeah, and the research that I'm doing, you know, I feel like every time I discover new information, it's just like I get a jolt. Like, oh, this is great. Check this out. You know, I sent Herbie this email. I said, Herbie, I just wanted to let you know I joined SGI officially. You know, just wanted to let you know I'm in the club. And Herbie wrote back the nicest thing. He says, well, I always thought of you as a Buddhist anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, wow. He says, you know, you got that all-inclusive, empathetic thing happening.
Right, right. Yeah, or another way of saying it that sometimes people say is none of us are Buddhists. We are all Buddhas.
Right.
Right.
Right. Right.
Don't be a Buddhist, be a Buddha.
Right. 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 Right.
You know, a Buddha, right? Buddha meaning the bud, that which is unflowering, that which is opening, that which is expanding, that which is receiving.
I have a question for you.
Okay. As we wind down, here we go.
Well, because I believe I asked you this before, but there's a certain thing that people like, you know, again, to bring up somebody like Wayne or Herbie or people who really just seem so nicely balanced, you know, dealing with, and this is right up your area. You just start dealing with trauma or anger or any sort of pain, like inner pain. Like, do you personally, like, how do you balance that out? Because we're all human beings and we all have emotions, right? We all get angry, we all get sad, we all get whatever. But how do you not let that overtake you?
Well, now I have better tools. Now I understand my physiology a little bit better, but we all get caught. I got caught yesterday snapping at somebody because they didn't, in my opinion, do what they said they were going to do when they said they were going to do it in the way that I had thought that they would. And, you know, all of that. Expectations lead to what? Problems, right?
Right.
So
Right.
if I didn't have any expectations around it, then, you know, but at the other time, you know, on the other hand of it, like, I was like, no, this is like a professional thing you're supposed to do. So I was
Sure.
correct to have a response, right? But the reactive part is how far are you going to go, and are you doing it with intention to hurt somebody or not? So the answer I found is two things. One is understanding, my physiology and my nervous system from a intellectual left brain perspective in terms of what's really going on with the neurons that fire together, that wire together, what happens when we get triggered, when we feel like we're betrayed, when we feel like we're being shamed, when we feel like whatever it is that's old, gunk that's, somebody hit that note, you know what I mean? Knowing what is happening, that like, when you get the sort of brainstem amygdala reactivity, your prefrontal cortex goes offline. So you cannot respond.
I'm not hip to none of that.
Yeah. So no, that's no. So you know that, right? And then
Right.
you practice this part of self-regulation. You put your feet on the floor, you let them connect to the ground, you feel the vibration of Mother Earth. You allow yourself to receive the support of the earth, and you recognize that you are as much of it as you are on it. And go ahead.
But it sounds like when you had you said this happened yesterday?
Mm-hmm.
So like how long would you say, like, was it immediate? Like after you had your moment, did you immediately step back and go, "Whoa, I didn't mean to do that," like that?
Well, I mean, I didn't go. Say the thing was a 6. I didn't go to a 20 or an 18.
Gotcha.
You know what I'm saying? It was a 6. I went to an 8. You know what I mean?
It's not bad if we talking 20.
Do you know what I mean? Like it wasn't. And I apologized for it. And I just said, we're all in this together at the end of the day. I know people are trying to do their best, and I just want this to be able to work out for all of our benefit. And that's the practice is, they call it in psychology, rupture and repair. You come back to that which is broken and you mend it, just like you do that. What is it? Kintsugi in the Japanese.
Yes.
Take the gold and they repair the broken pieces. You take the plate, it breaks apart. It's more valuable with the gold seams back in it, like the Leonard Cohen sign, where it's cracked, that's where the light gets in.
Yeah.
That's us. So it's these pieces that then build the relationship with me and the people that I was barking at, because I'm just like, I'm human, I'm real, right? I'm humble enough to be able to come back to you to sort of say like, I'm bad, my bad.
Yeah.
Yes, there was a little stuff that was off here. But, let's work on trying to make it better, because that's the win-win. That's
That's admirable. That's admirable. Most people don't do that.
It's a practice. It's not it's a combination. So as I was saying, feet on the floor, seat in the chair, take a couple of breaths. I'm always in my seat. 90% of the time I am in my seat these days. I don't know if I was ever in my seat until a few years ago. Noble and dignified, sitting like the Buddha underneath the, rose apple tree, able to be relaxed and alert simultaneously, not trying to be or do anything in particular. I mean, the way you feel with your bass.
Yeah.
It happened on occasion, sort of spontaneously, but I didn't really know how to like take my seat and put myself in a place where I can be more coming from there more often than not. Right. And that's a skill and that's a practice. And you can do that driving your car by not flipping the bird on somebody who's annoying.
Right.
You don't have to do it on a meditation cushion.
Yeah, I wonder what, with specific regard to road rage, I wonder where that came from. I don't remember people being that angry, just generally speaking, before.
I think it's the permissiveness of unbridled self-expression, to use a Terry Real term, and that's rewarded as a way of sort of false power.
Man, you said something there. I'm serious. Because I find that I was telling somebody this the other day. I feel like there's that old saying, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, which is a way that to me that says you will be rewarded for being loud and abrasive, and I find that in this sort of culture where everybody's sort of like stepping over each other and being cruel at each other in order to, I don't know, what are they going for? To be heard, achieve success. I mean, I don't know what it is, but I just find that I've never seen unbridled anger at such minuscule things before, like road rage,
Mhm.
I think people wonder if they'll get like, and like you had things like YouTube stars of people doing the most subjective things, and I'm thinking, wow, they're not, what is this?
Right. But a lot of that is, some of that is about, I want people to like me, which is a natural attachment thing, right? If you're looking back at attachment theory, you're more ambivalent, perhaps attachment, because your external validation is what's really important to you. The other one is I deserve to have, I'm supposed to have, right? I need to be right as opposed to be happy. It's
Right.
rigid. There's no flexibility. So you're the stiff oak that breaks in the storm as opposed to the reed that bends in the wind. You know what I
Yes.
mean? And is it okay to be a reed, or do you see a reed as being weak? Well, not if it survives. You know what I'm saying? So it's a question of perspective, and we only have, just like we do with white supremacy, like blonde, thin, tall. That's the beauty standard in Western.
Right.
Blue-eyed. Well, I know a lot of people who don't look like that who are gorgeous. So
Right.
it's just a question of whose truth are we looking at and who gets to dictate. And I think that that's what we really have to determine for ourselves. What's our truth? What's our authenticity? What do we know inside? And then how do we manage that, deal with that, bring it forth in what ways are wise and discerning to the greater world?
Yes. Francesca, I learn so much from you every time we speak. Seriously.
Likewise.
I really mean that. You are at that level that I strive to attain. You remind me very much of you coming out of that Wayne and Herbie kind of thing.
I don't know much about Jupiter, but I got a picture of Saturn in my house. So
There you go. There you go.
Mr. McBride, inspiration that you are, I think we're going to leave it here because it seems like it's a good place to do so. And it's about time. What do you think?
Yeah, I can hang on here with you all day long, but I actually have to go prepare to go read scripts for NPR right now. We're doing the latest episode of Jazz Night in America.
Do you want to mention that real quick before we close? Tell people how they can tune in.
Yeah, so I've been the host of NPR's Jazz Night in America for the last 5 years now, and it airs. I actually don't know when it airs in the New York area. I believe it's Saturday. It's either Friday and Saturday or Saturday and Sunday on WBGO here in the New York area, 88.3. And we're now on almost 300 stations nationwide. And so we're NPR show. It's a collaboration between NPR, WBGO, and Jazz and Lincoln Center.
Beautiful. I love it. So people can tune in and really enjoy the music. And I mean, art, music, all these things inspire us, I think. And we just have to find our way to be our own creative and authentic selves, which you do so beautifully. And people can come check you out.
As do you, my friend. Anybody you can see where I am on ChristianMcBride.com, and got all my tour dates for the rest of the year lined up on there. And I'm always playing somewhere in either New York or in Newark. So I'm always around.
You are, for sure. And I'm hoping that people get out to see you in Newport too.
Yes, please get up to the Newport Jazz Festival.
When is that?
August 2nd, 3rd, and 4th.
Beautiful.
First weekend in August.
Christian McBride, leaving it here, sending you a big hug. Thank you so much for joining us on ReRooted on the Be Here Now Network.
Anytime. It's always a pleasure to speak with you.
Ciao.